Assalamu alaikum and good afternoon to everyone. First of all, thank you for the people who organized this event and giving us the opportunity, especially Dr. Tawallah and Dr. Asim at Shifa International Hospital, Islamabad. We'll start with the shock physiology, and I would be doing trying to be simple, but there will be few slides for the people, especially who are working in pediatric or cardiac ICU. So I have nothing to disclose. So in this presentation, we will be reviewing the factors central to oxygen delivery and cardiac output, and we will be learning the physiological and lab parameters to guide therapy in case of shock. It could be any shock, hypovolemic, hemorrhagic or cardiogenic or any kind of shock. And also we will be discussing the physiological reason behind PALS management guideline. We will also touch base the recent updated PALS guideline and also review different types of inotropic support and vasoactive agents. So definition of shock is very simple. Is the mismatch between supply and demand. Supply is basically the cardiac output, and demand what the body is using to metabolize and to keep alive. So this is the delicate balance. So oxygen, DO2 mean the oxygen delivery, and VO2 meaning is a consumption by the body, whatever the body is consuming oxygen for metabolism or activity. So this is the balance between oxygen delivery and the supply and demand. And you can see if there is a tilt in the balance in the delivery. Delivery means it is the basically the cardiac output, but we call it delivery because also sometime we are interested not only the amount of volume the body is receiving, also we are interested the how good quality of blood the tissue is receiving. And VO2, as we discussed, it is the consumption. So if there is a tilt in the balance, then you can have a shock. This is a slide, especially the people who are working in the pediatric ICU. You can see normal, this is the physiological mechanism, and this is the oxygen consumption, and on the horizontal axis, there is the oxygen delivery. And normally, the balance is like this. I mean, the most important thing here, I mean, normally we have mixed venous saturation like around 75, and you can see the delivery is 4 times more than the oxygen demand or consumption. But as for some reason, if you develop the shock or you're, for some reason you are developing shock, then what happens? There is an increase. First, there is a decrease in the oxygen delivery, but at the same time, sometimes body can compensate a lot. And then oxygen extraction at the tissue level increases. But there is a critical time when initially, that is the reason we call it compensated shock. Once there is a increased cardiac output or there is an increased extraction at the tissue level. But once the shock goes into the decompensated stage, then you can see that is the critical point. And once this curve is going downhill, and you can see even with the more oxygen demand, delivery is not optimizing the oxygen requirement of the body. So, and obviously if somebody has a mixed venous saturation means, I want to clear that point for the people who doesn't work in pediatric ICU. Normally we put the center line in the neck or femoral, and we draw oxygen saturation from the blood gas. And according to the PALS guideline, at least it should be above 70%. We know that our arterial oxygen saturation is like around 90%. So there is a gap of 25, which is normal. But if you have shock developing, then you can see there is a decrease in the oxygen saturation in the mixed venous blood, and that indicates the shock is developing on, and that is very sensitive. Even before the urine output drops or the lactate start to rise, or other signs of shock you can see obviously on the monitor. So oxygen saturation in the venous blood gas is very important, and we will discuss. This is one of the main lab parameters what we see in the ICU for troubleshooting and monitoring of shock therapy. I put this slide just to show you that this is the normal right uh, atrial pressure, which is 0 to 4. And actually, mixed systemic pressure in the veins is around 10. So there is a gradient around like 4 to 6, which keeps the cardiac output intact. I mean, we take like the venous systemic pressure in the calf muscle veins. So calf muscle veins have like 10, and there is a right atrial pressure is around like 4. So this is the sixth gradient body needs to keep the delivery of oxygen going on. That is very critical, because once the heart failure starts or the shock happens, the right-sided pressure or RA pressure increase, and there is a less gradient, and obviously the less cardiac output. We will discuss in the future slides. So the types of shock, we know the hypovolemic can be because of the dehydration or the bleeding from anywhere. Cardiogenic shock is very important to discuss briefly. And also we'll discuss briefly the PALS guideline in the septic shock. Next slide, please. So you can see here, the preload, we have a lot of space for the preload. And this is the heart, and this is the systemic blood vessels. So the blood pressure in the systemic, we call it SVR. And we know that one cardiac output is equivalent to heart rate and stroke volume. So if there is, for some reason, there is a decrease in the cardiac output, body try to compensate by increasing the heart rate or by manipulating the stroke volume. These are the important determinants for us: preload, contractility, and afterload. Next slide, please. This slide I put, I mean, you can see there is a lot of physics in the physiology of shock. We know that one, according to the Ohm's law, that any flow into the pipe depend on the pressure gradient directly, and it is inversely proportional to the resistance in the pipe. Next slide, please. Next one. Next one. So you can see, yes, thank you. So flow is equivalent to pressure divided by the resistance, and or you can put like that blood pressure is equivalent to the resistance in the blood vessels, and also it depends on the amount of flow. So we have mean arterial pressure equivalent to SVR or cardiac output. A lot of times we are trying to manipulate the cardiac output, which is preload, contractility, and afterload, and we forget about the SVR, because SVR is reflected by on the bedside by the blood pressure, whether you are taking invasive or non-invasive. And most of the time blood pressure cheats you. And sometimes if you are asking your nurse, what is my blood pressure for the patient, and she is saying that, doctor, I'm running. If she is running blood pressure a couple of times, that assume that there is no blood pressure for the patient, because then obviously you have to be very quick, because if the blood pressure is running again and again by the nurse and she is not telling you the blood pressure, then you don't have the blood pressure. And even if you have blood pressure, because body try to compensate by increasing the systemic vascular resistance, there is endogenously catecholamines. And sometimes you are just treating the blood pressure and you forget about the oxygen delivery, which is cardiac output, stroke volume, and the heart rate. So we will discuss about the stroke volume in detail. Next slide, please. So stroke volume, we know that it is preload, contractility, and afterload. I think this is very important to understand that in which patient you will manipulate the preload, in which patient you try to improve the contractility, or in which patient you will more emphasize on the afterload reduction. Next one. So if you see the venous return, it is the degree to which the myocardium is stretched before it contracts. Heart will give to the body whatever heart has in the venous phase. So that is very important. You need to optimize the preload in different kind of shock, especially if you have hypovolemic or hemorrhagic shock. But the most important thing in kind of preload, because sometimes you are trying to optimize the preload and you end up by having a pulmonary edema. So that is the reason behind in the recent 2020 update in the PALS guideline about the fluid boluses, we will discuss in the future slides. So you have to keep eye on whenever you are optimizing the preload. But preload is very important. And also sometimes, most of the time, we forget about the preload to the left side of the heart. So what is preload to the left side of the heart? It is what the heart, left side of the heart is achieving from the venous return from the right side of the heart after getting oxygenation and the ventilation. So what does it mean? Because sometimes if patient has pulmonary hypertension, then there is a decreased preload to the left side of the heart. So even for the intensivist, you have to keep in mind, because you have to also optimize the preload to the left side of the heart. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So I put this slide. You can see there is a cardiac output and the right atrial pressure relation. I mean, normally you have 0 to 4 right atrial pressure, but if you have a lower pressure on the CVP, obviously you can optimize, and you can keep optimizing, and your cardiac output will be increased. But the problem with the preload, sometimes the CVP will not tell you, especially if there is an issue with the compliance of the ventricles. Then you have to counter the other parameters to optimize the cardiac output. We will discuss in future slides. But this slide will show you, as you optimize or you decrease, you increase the preload, you have the better cardiac output. This is the cardiac output line going on. Or you can increase the inotropy or decrease the afterload, you get the better cardiac output. Next slide, please. Afterload, this is the resistance against which the blood is expelled into the body. And it is very important once there is a impaired contractility, like the myocarditis. So because sometimes you cannot improve the contractility of the heart for some time, like in myocarditis. So what you can do, you can just reduce your afterload on the heart, because then it will be easy. Even if there is an impaired contractility, it is very easy for heart to eject blood into the body. So we'll discuss just quickly about the some terms. Inotropes, agent that improves myocardial contractility and enhance stroke volume, both. Vasodilator, they are the drugs which reduce the systemic vascular resistance. Inodilator, they are the one that increases cardiac contractility and simultaneously reduces systemic vascular resistance to reduce cardiac work afterload. So ultimately, they end up by having a better stroke volume and decrease SVR. And this is the role of vasopressor. I mean, for some reason, if your tank is dilated, like in septic shock or anaphylactic shock, so you can optimize the systemic vascular resistance by giving the vasopressor, and ultimately you have a better blood pressure. But again, we are not looking for better blood pressure. We are looking for oxygen delivery. We are looking for better urine output, better oxygen saturation in the venous blood gas, and decrease in your lactate. So vasopressor, this is the agent which increases the systemic vascular resistance. And there is another properties of the heart, which is lusotropy. So what is lusotropy? Milrinone, especially the milrinone, dobutamine also has this property, but milrinone, we really love that drug over the years, because what dobutamine does, whenever you start dobutamine on patient, so this is a very important message in my presentation, because when I came back, still in public sector, there is sometime you cannot get milrinone. So, and it is expensive and it is relatively unavailable. We are not talking about like Aga Khan Shifa or Children Hospital Lahore, but not everywhere you get milrinone immediately. So dobutamine, what does, once you start dobutamine in a patient, dobutamine also act on the heart receptors other than the systemic vascular resistance decrease. So it end up by having a more oxygen consumption demand, and even heart can get a lot of issues, because whenever you start dobutamine, dobutamine drops the blood pressure, but also it asks heart to do a lot of work. And sometimes there is a coronary spasm. Although it relaxes, dobutamine relaxes the coronary muscles and coronary artery blood flow, but because with the increased heart rate and increase tachycardia, and there is issues with the end diastolic volume of the heart, we really don't like dobutamine. This is the main difference between dobutamine and milrinone. What milrinone does, it just increases the stroke volume and it decreases the SVR, and also at the same time, it does not increase the myocardial oxygen consumption demand, and there is a less risk of itself insulting the heart. So that is the big disadvantage of milrinone versus the dobutamine. and we have less. Definitely, milrinone does not touch your heart rate. Although sometimes if you decrease blood pressure, you have reflex tachycardia, but directly milrinone does not affect your heart rate. So that is the big advantage, and it has better lysotropic properties as compared to the dobutamine. So what is lysotropy? It improves cardiac function by promoting diastolic relaxation and hence ventricular filling. So these slides are very basic. So how once you establish the diagnosis of shock, so how you establish? Just by clinical. We know these are the all parameters, signs in a shock patient: tachycardia, tachypnea, low blood pressure, narrow pulse pressure, or there is a weak peripheral pulses. But the most important thing what we have learned over the years in ICU, that temperature gap. If you have temperature gap more than 3, like you put a rectal catheter and you have a peripheral temperature, and if your temperature gap is increasing like 4 5, then you have a problem. Because most of the time in cardiac ICU, we have the rectal temperature available, but most pediatric ICU they don't have. You need a proper probe. But what clinical measures you can do, you can just see how much your patient vasoconstricted clinically. I mean, how much cold they are in the peripheries. Although they are cold because of the vasopressors you are giving, but it will give you some idea. And this is important message, that the core body temperature goes high in the low cardiac output syndrome. And how you measure core blood temperature? You measure by putting the rectal temperature probe. And the second one is the urine output. Obviously it is very reliable, and it is very easy and reliable method of diagnosing shock as well as monitoring of shock response to your therapy. Mixed venous saturation definitely need a central venous line. And if you have a ISTAT or blood gas available in your ICU or lab, immediately you can get the idea how much lactate is high. And once the high lactate, you try to shoot with your treatment. Definitely your lactate should be keeping, it should be coming down with your treatment. So these are the 4 parameters I put deliberately. These are the critical important. Even they give you the dynamic assessment of your shock therapy rather than just giving with the echo and rest of the thing by static therapy, static monitoring. These are the dynamic parameters: urine output, mixed venous saturation, and lactate. And temperature gap is very important. Other than, I mean, definitely you are saying after giving the fluid therapy or inotropes, your heart rate should be coming down if they are very tachycardia, having a very high heart rate to begin with. So physiology of causative factors, I mean, these are very important factors: preload, afterload, contractility. Obstructive, you have to rule out for the shock. If patient is not responding, especially a small babies like newborn or very small babies in ICU, you have to rule out pneumothorax. That give you the right-sided obstruction or pericardial tamponade. The very important, what is left-sided obstruction? Left-sided obstruction, anything which is preventing the preload to the left side of the heart, which is pulmonary hypertension. Pulmonary hypertension is very important. Any people who are working in post cardiac surgery ICU, you have to anticipate and you have to start treatment for pulmonary hypertension, because if you are not getting anything after cardiac surgery, you have to assume your patient and the history is suggestive of pulmonary hypertension. You have to start treating. And in cardiac ICU, you have to keep also the residual lesions. Intra-abdominal pressure is very important. If your patient is not responding to therapy, definitely if the abdomen get distended, there is a high intra-abdominal pressure, especially more than 15. Even you can measure in the ICU intra-abdominal pressure, or then nothing will work. You have to relieve your intra-abdominal hypertension, especially in small babies like they have neck or intra-abdominal sepsis. It compromises the GFR, and it causes the oliguria, renal failure, and ultimate they get a lot of anasarca and difficulty in ventilating. So keep in your mind always intra-abdominal hypertension, and anticipate and diagnose and treat. And also you have to keep in mind obstructed venous return in cardiac ICU. Physiological parameters to guide therapy we already discussed in brief. Lab measures, we discussed about the lactate and mixed venous saturation. So what is the gold standard to manage shock? I think the most important thing is the bedside presence, not for PGR or fellows, also the presence of consultant at the bedside. Because once you spending time with the patient, you come to know your patient well, and obviously then you can troubleshoot and you can monitor your therapy, that where you are heading. So bedside presence is very important, and that is the reason pediatric ICU or cardiac ICU, they need lot of dedication and motivation before you progressing in that field. So what are the physiological reasons behind using these inotropes, vasopressor and vasodilators? We'll go very quickly now. I put this slide of Paul septic shock. This is a very congested slide, but you can see here once you have a patient with a septic shock, first you have to recognize that they have a decreased mental status or perfusion, begin high flow oxygen and establish IV line. And obviously, if you don't have clinical signs suggestive of cardiac failure, like the hepatomegaly or basal crackles, then you start giving the fluids. Even in cardiac patient, you can give 5 to 10 ml per kg fluids. But the most important thing in the recent PALS guideline 2020 updated, now because previously there was a guideline, you keep giving fluid 20 ml per kg, 20 ml per kg till the 60 ml per kg, and then obviously you start thinking about starting inotropes. But now they ask you to keep hold on giving IV fluid. Definitely you will keep giving IV fluid, but you have to reassess patient frequently in between the giving IV fluid. But if your patient has a fluid refractory shock, obviously you want to start inotrope. Previously people are using more dopamine. Still, sometimes you don't have available epinephrine, or you have dopamine available. You can start with the dopamine and then later on you can add epinephrine. But definitely if you have epinephrine, that is the first line of choice now after fluid refractory shock. So obviously at that time you have to take care about the airway of the patient, and then you start titrating your epinephrine or rest of the drug. But if you have two inotropes, another important thing here, I think, once you are on epinephrine, not the low dose, I mean not the 0.03, then people should be thinking about putting a central line and putting arterial line also. And that is not a standard practice in Pakistan, especially in public sector, because of the resource limited issues. But definitely you will be, because if you cannot give your inotropes through a reliable central line, if you keep giving your inotropes through peripheral line, you cannot achieve the goals. So you need a reliable invasive blood pressure through arterial line and a reliable delivery of your inotropes. And once you, in a phase where you label catecholamine resistant shock, then obviously you will thinking about drawing a blood for cortisol and giving hydrocortisone. That is very important stage. Definitely you want to supplement your patient with a hydrocortisone. So you can see here that in shock you can have normal blood pressure, especially in a cold shock, but they have less than 70% oxygen saturation in the venous blood gas. Definitely already your patient is on epinephrine. So these are the patient who can get benefit with the vasodilator therapy. And the first choice is milrinone. So these are the patient, again I say, if you have normal blood pressure in a shock with already epinephrine going on, then you add milrinone. If you have low blood pressure, then please don't start milrinone, because milrinone has a long half-life. And if your blood pressure is already on the lower side, then and you will be having a problem. So definitely in those patients who are already on low dose like 0.03 or 0.05 epinephrine, you want to start with norepi. Or if you have vasopressin, you can start low dose vasopressin. But if you have low pressure, warm shock, and your saturation is above 70, and you are already on epinephrine, even to begin with, then you can add norepinephrine. So even in adults, there is straight away they go, even the first line drug they are using norepinephrine. But to give you just one idea, then in all cases, we try to use epinephrine as a first inotrope after giving the fluid boluses. If you don't have epinephrine, then you can start with 5 of dopamine and you can build up. But if you are building epinephrine on top of dopamine, then try to put central line. And obviously, if patient is already not intubated, you try to intubate if there is an indication, because ultimately by intubating the patient, you will reduce oxygen consumption demand. But that is again an area which need to be discussed at the senior level. But the second choice, if you are on dopamine, is then epinephrine. If you have a warm shock, then you can start with epi and you can add norepinephrine. With normal blood pressure, you should start milrinone. And obviously, these are the patients who have already received the hydrocortisone. I mean, the rest of the next management definitely even before need a proper pediatric ICU monitoring. And then obviously you are looking for catecholamine persistent shock. And then you are looking for the ECMO if you have. But I think most of the shock, they can be managed. And also keep in mind always, you have to give your patient calcium. I mean, you assess the calcium is a good inotropic support for these patients, and mostly they are deficient. And also you have already given cortisol, and sometime even in a very resistant catecholamine shock, you can try thyroxine also. So things to remember, we discussed just these. Always involve your ID colleagues and take care about the antibiotics, especially in our Pakistan setup. And if you have newborn, then you have, I mean, you can keep thinking about if you are missing something like TAPVR obstructed. And obviously you want to treat your primary cause. Sometimes you can reduce the oxygen consumption by reducing the fever, controlling the shivering, agitation, or work of breathing. Mean obviously reducing the work of breathing by intubating the patient. We'll skip this slide. I just put this slide to show you that these are the vasoconstrictor mainly act on the alpha receptor. And you can see, I mean, if you ask me what is the best drug, we always love epinephrine, always love. But please give a low dose epinephrine 0.03. Don't start with the 0.1, because sometimes you are putting too much afterload on the heart and then you build up. And obviously not only one parameter for therapy, also check the multiple parameters like heart rate, your blood pressure, urine output, mixed venous saturation, and lactate. And obviously epinephrine is an excellent drug, and it has all kind of heart muscle properties to augment heart functions. So important points, used after correction of intravascular volume, ideally through, we discussed that the need of putting central line or through a dedicated port. And obviously dobutamine and milrinone can be used in a low dose through peripheral line. All they have very short half-life, except milrinone, which has a longer half-life. But if you have milrinone induced hypertension, so you need to know what is the antidote. Antidote is calcium chloride, and the dose is 0.2 ml per kg. I mean, even you can give calcium gluconate, the dose is 1 ml per kg. And also you need to know that these things are not compatible with bicarbonate. So vasopressor need to give through central line. You look for good urine output like more than 1 ml per kg per hour, good capillary refill time, warm periphery improvement in conscious level, and patient heart rate should be stabilized. And there should be, the increase, there should be decrease in the base deficit. So bicarbonate has to come up with your therapy. And always remember, normal blood pressure is not normal perfusion. So that is, I think that is the message of my talk, that sometime we are happy with the low blood pressure as long as you don't have, your coronary, they are getting adequate blood, and your patient is passing urine. Even you don't need 90, 75 systolic is okay, as long as they are passing a good amount of urine output. So now we can conclude. These are the scenarios I put, but I think we don't have time. I am already very late. So we have already summarized. So just important points. We talk about the preload, contractility, and afterload. I think the most important thing that we have to shoot for the better oxygen delivery, not for better blood pressure. And if you are talking about oxygen delivery, we are talking about urine output, mixed venous saturation above 70, and lactate less than 2. Thank you very much, Dr. Ataullah. I think already I'm late.